Josie Derby is next on BBC One with this week's Inside Out West.
Hello, tonight we're investigating what happens when you're down and out in Bristol. We're going behind the doors of this emergency hostel to investigate claims it's become a dumping ground for the city's homeless.
If there's a fire inside this building, it could spread very rapidly indeed and threaten the lives of all the people that are staying here.
Also in the programme, the 999 emergency that left one of Bristol's best-known television producers fighting for his life. And behind the scenes at the Archers, we reveal how the dramatic storylines are inspired by real-life farms in Somerset. I'm Josie Derby and this is Inside Out West. When you're homeless and alcoholic, life can be pretty tough. Getting yourself sorted out requires determination and support. Tonight, we're investigating complaints that, in many cases, that support simply isn't good enough.
Getting out of this place is just going to be a godsend because I'm getting my life back.
John Deady's an alcoholic, but he's finally going into rehab.
I want to be normal. I want to be like I was before, not spending every day, every minute thinking about drink.
He's been living in an emergency hostel for the homeless. Here, a 6-month stay is the ideal. John's been here 2.5 years. We're investigating claims that behind this door lies a dumping ground for Bristol's homeless, a place where death can go unnoticed and serious questions are being asked about its safety.
It's just, you know, an accident waiting to happen.
From a fire safety point of view, this hostel is vulnerable.
Are you happy with housing vulnerable people in a building that's in that condition?
One thing I can guarantee about the place is that it's safe for people to stay in.
You'd be forgiven for not spotting Bristol's Victoria Street hostel. Hidden away on a rundown site, it's been managed by English Church's housing group since 2001. It's a frontline facility giving rough sleepers a temporary roof over their heads. Like John, his drink problem had driven him into the cold. So this is where you used to live. How long did you live here?
About 3 years.
John turned to drink after suffering abuse as a child at the hands of a teacher. It's still affecting you now, isn't it?
Very much so. I mean, it's affected my relationships, mentally. I really don't feel like I exist. The only reason I'm getting the help for this drinking is so people see me for what I am, not the alky.
The staff at the Victoria Street hostel have to deal with some of the most challenging people in society. But the hostel is supposed to be no more than a first step on the road to recovery.
Somebody staying in a hostel for 2.5 years is totally unacceptable. A hostel is designed for you to be there temporarily and move on into independent living.
John's agreed to show me the room he's been living in for so long.
This is my abode. Nice, isn't it?
This is where you live?
Yeah, unfortunately.
It costs residents just over £10 a week to stay here, topped up by as much as £450 from the taxpayer. That pays for the room and one-to-one support from highly trained members of staff. But even then, things can go wrong.
There was a bloke in here, right, that had been dead for days, and they didn't discover him until someone complained about the smell on the landing.
So how can someone be dead and not be discovered?
You tell me.
E.C.H.G admits that in 2007, a resident's death on a Thursday was not discovered until a Saturday when a member of staff failed to carry out his daily inspection. That member of staff has since been dismissed.
That's why I've insisted on this annual inspection audit of all our 24-hour supported schemes to ensure that people are checked on a 24-hour basis. It's fundamentally important to us that our staff are all trained to implement those procedures, and if they don't, then the consequences are severe, as we've seen in that incident.
£2 million of public money is currently spent on dealing with the city's homeless. But there are concerns about how the support that money pays for is being delivered and taken up. Alan Goddard helps helps run the Wild Goose Cafe, handing out food and comfort to those in need. He knows only too well the intensive support the homeless require to get back on their feet.
I lived on the streets for a very long time. I was in alcohol addiction. I'm a changed person, and I believe with the right support from a good hostel, people can move forward and they can get quality of life. If you're in a place for 2.5 years, you get institutionalised, and you'll probably get to a point where you won't want to move on, or you're too scared to move on.
So letting someone stay there for 2.5 years isn't necessarily helping them?
It's doing them more harm. At the end of the day, people need to be out in the community, living a type of real life. And you won't get that living in a hostel.
Last year, E.C.H.G successfully moved 43 people out of the hostel and onto a better life. Only 2 people living there now have been there for more than 6 months.
The majority of people stay there between 6 months and a year. But we do have individuals for whom it's really important they might be tied into a support programme, looking for rehab, where we won't actually kick them out when 6 months or a year or 2 year comes. We'll work with our funders who we're contracted with to work on something that works for that individual.
Bristol City Council says it's not received any complaints about the hostel, but admits it's never actually inspected it.
Right, we come down through here.
One former resident chose to spend most of his time at the hostel back outdoors.
Right, this is where I used to sleep. I'd have my bed and that put down there, with a sleeping bag and a tarpaulin in case it rained.
How, especially when it's cold, is that better than your room at the hostel?
Because the actual room in the hostel was absolutely disgusting. It was just basically filthy.
Can we talk a little bit about the conditions of Victoria Street hostels? It's quite a run-down building.
Well, I think the first thing to say, and something I really want to get across, is that the building is safe for homeless people to stay in. We're working with the most marginal people, the most vulnerable people. We need to give them somewhere that's safe and clean and gives them the support from our staff. Now, this project is doing that.
E.C.H.G has been criticised in the past by the Audit Commission for the standards of its properties, and some residents have had concerns about the standard of fire safety at the hostel.
The fire escape is poorly maintained, caked in pigeon feces, so if you have to exit in a hurry, you're probably more danger slipping over and breaking your neck than actually being burnt to death.
Since starting our investigation, E.C.H.G has called in the fire service to inspect the building, and we've got our hands on their report.
It says the hostel's fire safety management is now well above average, but it's a high-risk building and problems remain.
There were obstructive means of escape, there were problems with the training of staff, there were holes in the compartment walls allowing smoke to spread, and there were problems with the external escape route.
Did what you read in the report worry you?
Yes, obviously they've taken steps to make things better, but there's quite a way to go. And a lot of these provisions, like keeping the escape routes free of obstructions, aren't particularly expensive. I mean, these are vulnerable people in the community, and they deserve better than this.
As with any fire report, there will always be things that can be improved. We've said yes, we will improve those things. We've already done an awful lot of those things. We've had a couple of stairs replaced as they requested, and we're working on those. But the overall result of that inspection was something that was really positive, and we're pleased with that, and we'll continue to work with the fire brigade to ensure it maintains the safe standards we expect from all our schemes.
We've been speaking to Bristol City Council throughout this investigation, but they've just got back to us with news that's a big surprise.
The council wouldn't give us an interview, but in a statement said,
"We are currently in talks with E.C.H.G over the decommissioning of this facility. The venue was only ever seen as a temporary measure until other commissioned services come on stream."
So, after 8 years, Victoria Street's days now look to be numbered. But for John, the future looks brighter. He's been given the help he needs to get sober and to close the door once and for all on his life in the hostel.
And if there's something you think we should investigate for a future programme, then you can always email me in confidence. My address is josie@bbc.co.uk.
Still to come tonight, Somerset's answer to Ambridge. Some secrets from behind the scenes at the Archers.
Hey, when we've got this lot back in the paddock, do you fancy taking a stroll over to the wetland area?
That's in 10 minutes here on Inside Out West.
Do you remember the TV series 999? It was made right here in Bristol by one of the city's best-known TV producers, Andy Batten Foster. Well, tonight, Andy tells the dramatic story of his own 999 emergency, which nearly cost him his life.
After years of making a programme about people in life or death situations, little did I imagine that I'd be involved in my own blue light medical drama that very nearly polished me off. The first thing I realised when I came round in hospital was that a big chunk of my life had gone missing. From the 5th or 6th of December, when I remember being busy and active, something like 2.5 to 3 weeks, I'd been lying here in an intensive care bed. Now, I had no idea why. I had no idea what had been happening to me during that period, and I had no idea even what had been wrong with me. That's what I'm using this film to find out. What I know now is that I had meningitis, but to find out how it all began, I'm going to speak to my wife, Harriet. The speed at which meningitis strikes is truly frightening. I'd gone to bed with flu-like symptoms, but by 6 in the morning, Harriet began to think something wasn't right.
I sort of shook you slightly and I said, Andy, are you all right? And there was no response. And I thought, well, I'll leave him a bit. And I left you about 5 minutes and I thought, no, hang on, this isn't right. So I then started really, really shaking you. I mean, really, really shaking.
I remember that.
Shaking.
I remember you.
Yeah.
I remember thinking you were angry with me.
Yeah, but the point is, you didn't wake up. You wouldn't wake up at all. And at that point, I thought, no, something is very seriously wrong.
It's just as well Harriet reacted quickly. Meningitis is an inflammation of the surface of the brain, and it can kill within hours.
Once you're in the hospital, you were rushed straight to A&E and made an absolute priority. I mean, it was very interesting. They just dropped everything. Because you were having fits, they didn't really have the expertise at the BRI, so you needed to go over to Frenchay, so they bundled you into an ambulance and took you over there, which was quite scary because it was such a big deal. I mean, I knew by this point that something had gone very, very badly wrong.
At Frenchay, I was wired up to one of these, an EEG machine. Today, I've come back to find out more about how they used it to decide how to treat me. So what are we looking at here then, Nick?
Andy, this is your electrical activity that's coming from your brain. It's being generated in the nerve cells that make up the cortex.
Nick Kane is the neurophysiologist who was in charge of monitoring what was going on in my brain while I was in intensive care. So how useful was this machine when it came to the treatment I had?
Very useful in detecting seizures that you were having frequently whilst you're on the intensive care unit. And this is an actual seizure being recorded. This lasts for about a minute, but then you soon go into other seizures, one after another. And this was critical because the brain was really at danger of being damaged from having so many seizures.
Your EEG didn't look very good. Didn't look very good at all, I'm afraid.
I've got that picture by now, yes, I realise that. It was Dr. Peter Hayward who had to decide what to do next. The medicine I was being given to stop the fits didn't seem to be working.
The thing to do at that stage, where you have a patient who is continuing to have seizures and continuing to have problems, is actually to put the patient into a coma, which is what we did for you.
What my family were soon made aware of, though, was that for a patient having so many fits, the chances of pulling through were really not very high.
The really, really traumatic bit, I mean, the bit that was the most difficult, was when they began to bring you round, because as Dr. Hayward had explained to me, he really wasn't sure what was going to happen, that either you might continue to fit or you might not fit for a while and start fitting again, or you might be all right. But that was only one of several options, and it seemed the least likely, really. And he said the worst case scenario is that he'll die.
Thankfully, after 2 or 3 days, I was brought round from the coma and the brain seizures stopped. I'm not entirely back to normal. I'm always going to have to wear hearing aids now, and I'm never going to get the sight back in this eye. But not so long ago, I never thought I'd be able to walk down a busy street like this, let alone cross a road. Now, I'd really like to find out more about the disease that so nearly finished me off. I've arranged to meet a Bristol man who for nearly 30 years has dedicated his life to finding a cure for meningitis. Steve Damon runs the charity Meningitis UK, based at Down End. So 10 years ago, you were in the trucking business?
That's right, yeah. I had a successful haulage business, and my wife used to run a truck stop.
Did you give it all up for this?
I did. It completely changed my life, and you know, for the last 27 years, I've you know, been wearing my meningitis hat, and full-time for the last 10 years.
It was in November 1982 that Steve's little boy Spencer suddenly became very ill.
Spencer was 14 months old. I've got a picture of him here. And within 24 hours from being a happy, bouncy little boy, he was completely overwhelmed by meningococcal meningitis and septicemia, and he died. And there was nothing they could do to save him.
What sort of support existed in those days, Steve?
Well, there were no charities to represent meningitis. There wasn't even a leaflet to explain about the disease. So I happened to go down the library in Bristol and try to understand a little bit more about it. But you know, of course, in those days it was all above my head. It was quite a hopeless situation, really.
Far from giving in to that sense of hopelessness, Steve Damon has, through his charity, raised millions to fund research into meningitis.
Well, it completely changed my life when Spencer died. I'd never done any fundraising, I'd never sat on a committee before, and it was completely different.
Steve's brought me to the meningitis research laboratories his charity has set up at Bristol University. It's an internationally recognised centre where scientists work on vaccines, and it's named after